Okay, so let's release a build. So here's my Fabricam call center, and I'm going to take. Actually, let's just assume I made a change. So here's the app. Everybody seen anybody not seen Fabricam Fiber before? It's a little fake app written by Microsoft for showing, this is just out there. You can download it and try it, play around with it a bit. So you'll notice on the Customers tab it says first name, last name. And it's like that. So I'm in the dev environment, port 8000. If I switch over to QA environment, port 9000, go to the Customers tab, last name, first name. And then the product environment is 10,000. Same deal. Same app in all three, right? So let's go back over to here. And let's go into Customers Index. And let's take that word name off, just so we can see something changing. So I'm going to check this in. Yep, I didn't run it first. That's terrible, but my new change. I do not condone this. It's for speed only. It's because it's snowing like hell out. Actually, I don't think it is anymore. I will build it though. That's the least I can do, right? Before I send it to QA. Okay. So I built it. Off to my build. I'm always worried that the things that I've been doing as I've been chatting have broken something, but let's see what happens. So we're going to kick off a build. They only take a few seconds. Now this build is actually going to kick off a deployment, right? Because we got it set to go automatic. So over here, let's go. So I haven't showed you this yet. So this is the release management website. So this is the little website that we go to do our approvals of and our validations and our acceptances and all that stuff. So I would receive an email at some point saying, oh, something's been deployed or something's being, so here it is, it's running the release manager build process. So the build seemed to work okay. So let's just give this a second, it should, there we go. So our build was successful. Now, if we go over to Release Manager, and so here we go. Now, so this is the build, this is the release that came through. As a Release Manager, by the way, in the Release Manager client, I can also follow this release. So here's my release in progress, and I like to look at it this way. Here's all the steps. So here's everything that's got to happen, who's got to do it, and what's been done so far and what's pending. So as you can see over here, we've got, so Dev, the acceptance was done and it was automated, so we didn't have to do anything. The deployment was done, which is always automated. The validation was done, which was also automated, but the deployment, here's what happened during the deployment. There's where it removed the website. Here's an actual script of what, or the log of what happened, so I can look at each individual step and see what happened. It's a great debugging tool to know what happened when you deploy. So each step is there, and I can see if anyone failed. I'll have error messages. I'll be able to look at the log. I'll know exactly what happened. And then I've got my validation, and it is waiting for approval. So as a dev team, I didn't test it when I was in it, so I probably should now, right? So it's in my dev environment. If I go over to customers, voila, the name is gone, it's been deployed. If we go to QA, we'll see it's still there. There's no crazy magic going on. QA still has it. So, and if I look here, I can see this is waiting for approval just a few seconds ago. The build that was triggered, it will actually tell me right here. So it was a nightly Fabricam Fiber 709.13 build. I can go look at that build so I can see what's in it. I can see the release notes right in the build. I can see that it's the call center. If I had the database too, which I didn't actually include, I would also see the database here as a separate box. So each component that's being deployed shows up as a separate item. And if I look at my my stages, there's dev. I can see it was accepted. And it was an automated acceptance at that time and date. It was the installation succeeded on that time and date. The validation was automated and is waiting to be approved. Waiting for Brian Keller to approve, actually. It's only one person can approve this. So, as Brian Keller, I'm going to approve it.
Would it be the group name if it was a group at that point?
Yeah, yeah. It would just say ops or whatever. We'll see it in a minute, actually, what it'll... So, by the way, I can reassign this to someone else if I don't want to approve it. If I say, I don't have time, hey, Lori, will you approve this for me? And I can just reassign it to her. I can reject it if it didn't work, and that just, it will never get on to QA. It's gone. That build's toast. Or I can approve it. I can put in a note. Looks good in dev. Approve. So, right away it comes back, because nothing had to happen, right? All it did was it flipped right over to the approved release. So now the QA team, it's pending the acceptance. And I mean, sometimes you want this step in QA because QA may still be working with build 11 and they haven't finished their test run, and they'd like to finish their test run before they take your build 12. So, you know, all you've done is said, we're happy with this build if you want to take it next. We could do this to 5 more builds before they ever decide to take one, and then they get their choice. They can pick what they want from the list. They can just go, okay, well, we might as well take the latest one, so we'll reject, we'll take this one.
What if you don't want them to take one of those?
Then you can come in and reject it and get rid of it.
Oh, so even though you approved it, you can reject it.
Well, you'd have to be the release. Yeah, you'd have to get the release manager to do that.
Oh.
Yeah. Unless you retain the rights, you know, you could stick one of your developers in the QA group if you want to be a little tricky about it. But
one of your team leads into it. Yeah.
So now the QA team can say, yeah, we're ready to take this build, and they can approve it, and they go ready for QA. And if they're not ready to take it right now, maybe they want to deploy it tonight at midnight, because there's still some testers working away. They could go, you guys finish what you're doing, and but when you come in tomorrow morning, build 12 is going to be there. So they pick when they want it to deploy, they approve it. So then this is the whole, you know, once you've built all this, all everybody's got to do is come to this site when they get an email and go, yeah, I like that, I'll take that build. Or no, that build's no good, I reject it. It's just so easy. So where are we now? We've got, so here it was getting deployed into QA. So it's pending the validation in QA, so I can go to QA now. And if I go to Customers tab, I should see, yep, no name on there. So it's been deployed to QA, all is good. Curious why I don't have something here. There we go. And actually, and if I look here, anybody at any stage can see exactly where this is, right? They can go back and see, you got a complete audit trail of everything that happened to it, who accepted it, who was responsible for the deployment, blah, 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 so on and so forth. In QA, who accepted it, who installed it. It's waiting for validation. So yeah, it looks like, I mean, I can run it, so it's cool, I'll validate it. A lot of teams just avoid the validation one, because once you trust your scripts, you're just validating that it deployed properly, right? Once you trust your scripts, they're going to work every time. If you start mucking with them, though. So now it's waiting for approval. So QA has tested it. They approve. QA says this is good. Approve that. And now it's waiting for acceptance into production, or whatever the next stage is. And then just so on and so forth, every stage as it goes along. And we can see the full audit trail of what happened and who did it. You can look at traffic overviews of every app would be lined up here with how many times it failed or made it into a particular environment, and et cetera, and so forth. And
is it possible to deploy to dev and not have it go to QA until you're ready for it to go to QA?
Yep. Just don't. So if QA doesn't accept it?
No, I mean, you don't want it to go to QA at all. You're doing your technical you're doing your validation your own.
Oh, you mean you don't want it to go to QA
right.
at all?
Right.
Okay, yeah. So well, first of all, I could set up a release path that does that, but let's say I've got my regular release path.
Yeah.
And what I do when I trigger a build, so this is me triggering a build. So you haven't seen this yet, I just realized, because we did it from the build, right? The build actually. So if I wanted to, I could come into my my Fabricam call center. Matter of fact, more people do this than let the build do the trigger. People like to be in control of, right? Instead of just builds willy-nilly sending stuff places. So I can say new release, and right here I can give the release a name. So I could say this is, you know, this is 12.6, or this is July candidate, or you know, whatever it happens to be that makes sense for us. I tell it, I'm saying what release template I want to send. I tell it the target stage. So if I only want it to go to dev, I can say I only want you to go to dev, so I pick it right there. And then this will go down that release path using that template, but it will stop after dev. It won't go to QA. Is that what you want to do?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I guess. Yeah.
And then I tell it what build I want. So I can either say, oh, grab the latest, or, hey, how about this? Let's go back and grab build 11. So let's go deploy build 11. How do you like this for easy? So I don't like the idea that I took name off that website. I want it back the other way. Man, we put in something that really messed things up. We got to go back a build, or we got to go back 2 builds. So you just come into Release Manager and say, oh, I want to go back to that build. That build was a good build.
It keeps all the backups.
As long as it's up to you to keep them, but as long as you have those builds sitting there in the drop folder, you can go back and redeploy from any one of those. So now it's going to, so it's deploying, right? It's done its deployment into dev. So look, if I go back over to dev now, go to customers, I'm back in my original build. How easy is that? So, you know, when you're dealing with DAC packs and databases, that starts to get a lot more complicated, but it is possible, right? It's the whole idea that, I mean, you know, like with builds, I don't want to go too deep into builds, but you see these are all my builds that I've got, and when in this particular build definition, I can set a retention policy, so I can tell it how many builds to keep, and it'll delete. So on a successful build, once there's 10, it'll delete that 11th one, and then every time it builds another one, it'll delete the oldest one. But if that oldest one, you'll also notice, see these little locks? So every time a build goes to Release Manager, the Release Manager build process locks it. So the retention policy won't delete it. So if it's a deployed build, it gets locked. So you would have to, if that build got rejected and you no longer need it, then, excuse me, you just come back in here and say retain indefinitely, turn that off, and now the retention policy will just clean it up. And you can also change the quality, right? So I can say, oh, this happens to be the build that's released right now. And that will send an email to anybody saying, when you change the quality, so you can say, oh, I've changed the quality to, I'm curious how, because this is old build stuff, and then there's release, so I'm assuming Microsoft will somehow tie these things together as they merge the products together. But, you know, with the build quality, I can do things like, you know, I can say, well, this build is ready for an initial test. So that just lets, you know, anybody who subscribes to build quality will get an email that says, build 709.11 is ready for its smoke test. So the test team can go over to Release Manager now and say, oh, is that build in this list? And they can find it and approve it, and it's in their QA. So there's all kinds of little ties together to coordinate across. Questions? I think we're pretty much, I'm pretty much out of time, aren't I, Larry? We're close?
The DAC pack stuff.
Yep.
So let's say you made a minor change, you added 2 columns to the table.
Yep.
Does that show up in the log that only these 2 changes were deployed?
Well, the log, what'll show up in the log, yes, it will. So the log will show the log of the script running. So just like you would see the log.
But you get the delta.
Yes.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah. So when you compare, so SQL package will let you, all that's doing is calling SQL package, right?
Yeah.
So I had one customer that I went to, and you have to be sysadmin to do a DAC pack, right? To update a database through DAC pack. And we weren't sysadmin, and no DBA in that company was going to give us sysadmin, right? They're just they're in control of the database server, and you don't touch it. So we mucked around with it a bit. We go, well, we can have SQL package generate the script for us instead of just updating the database, which is what we do when we're going to pass it off for production or whatever, right? We just have it generate. So I still take my DAT pack. I use SQL package to compare it to the database I want, and it generates me a script. But then we realized we can run a script without being sysadmin. We just can't. So we would use SQL, we just did it in 2 steps. We did the exact same thing. They wouldn't let us do the DAT thing, but we would generate the script and then just run it.
Yeah.
And still got to do it.
Yay!
We won! So yeah, there's lots of little ways around. But in worst case, at least, I mean, the beautiful thing is, you know, how many people know exactly what their dev, QA, and UAT databases look like at any given time? Right? All the time? Most people are going, oh, yeah, I think I know. But, I mean, when your database is stored in source control, we can do a whole talk on just this, I think. The database is stored in source control. When I want that version of the database to be in that environment, I just have to say, hey, compare this guy to that and give me a script to make him look like that. And then do the same thing to UAT. And I don't care what state they're in or what anybody's done to them on the side, it's going to get it the same as this, right? It's going to take it from what it is and make it the same as version 12 in my database.
Interesting.
One other little trick that is hard to find, so I'll just point it out to you. There's a couple of ways to, I don't think I actually showed you this. Let me show you really quick. We talked a bit about it though. You know, you got in your web config, you'll have, you know, like right here, right? Here's my catalog, Fabricam Fiber Express. But, you know, that's not going to be the same database name or server or whatever in dev and QA and UAT, and it has to change. So, you know, there's several ways to do this, right? We can set up configurations, right? I can set up different configurations, right? I can create a UAT one and a QA one and a production one and whatever. I don't know, have you guys done this before? We're really going off topic now, but watch, just to give you an idea. So, and then I can say add config transform, and what it does is it creates little web configs for each environment. So now in those configs, they have transformations in them. So what you do is you put all the common stuff in web config, but then you can put this special stuff into the debug, right? So there's a sample here where it actually changes, it transforms the attribute to something else when it's debugged, when you build for debug. And it transforms it for something else when you build for release or for UAT. And if you have a Windows app that has an app config and you want to do the same thing, there's a tool you can download called, do you remember what it's called?
It's not called shit.
It's not called shit. It's
That's
called
an awesome tool name.
Slow Cheetah. How's that for memory? Slow Cheetah. Yeah, well, it sounds just like what it should, right? That's why it's so easy to remember. So, yeah, called Slow Cheetah. If you download Slow Cheetah, it's a tool that you can install that will let you do the same thing for app configs. So this is a cool way to do it. This is nice because now each environment, I can set up each environment and my debug. As long as I'm building locally for debug, I get my local stuff, and then when I build it for UAT, it changes it all. That's cool, but you know what really happens here, right? As we all know, is we end up with multiple builds, right? So if I go out into my build folder and look in the bin, right? I end up. No, I've only ever built for one, but I would end up in my bin folder with a debug folder and a release folder and a UAT folder. So I actually have separate builds for each of these. And when you build for multiple releases with team build even in TFS, you end up with multiple builds. So then it becomes, well, I deploy this build into there and this build into there, and yeah, they all came from the same place and they should be the same, but they're not. They don't have the same timestamps on them. They're not the same DLLs. They're different. So what you can do instead of that is we can not use that if we want. And if you make a copy of your web config and you name it web config, or any file can do this, by the way, token, So now what you have to do, so this should be an exact copy of that, except wherever you want something to be replaced by Release Manager, you have to put the token in instead of the value. So you underscore, underscore, database, underscore, underscore. That's what a token looks like. So that back here in Release Manager equates to, in the component, when I go to configuration variables and I say after installation, add database, and look in the config file, it will look for underscore, underscore, database, underscore, underscore, and replace it with whatever I told it to in my release template. Right? That's cool. So, we're almost there.
So you named it .token. Is it actually looking in .config.token?
No. So what's going to happen is, so the reason I did this is because there is a special release template, or actually not a special one, but version 12 of the build process. So you need this guy, the release TFS or release Git, whichever one you're using, and it will add a little section or a couple other variables to your release section. One of them being process release tokens. And if you set that to true, then what it will do is, after it builds your application, it'll go looking for files that end in .token, and it'll copy them over their counterparts. So it'll take web.config.token and make it web.config. So what happens is this, at the build, becomes this. But during development, in your source code, it's this. Make sense? It's kind of convoluted how it all comes together, but it's also very clever. I mean, it's quite easy to follow, and it's just kind of confusing at first. So that's kind of a new way to do it. So there's more than one way to do it, to deal with tokens, but it's great. So once you've got your tokens, then, you really don't care anymore. As long as, if I make an edit to this guy, I've got to change this, because this is going to replace it. That's all. I just got to make that change twice.
And that's how that's locally, because you never do.
Questions? Did you learn anything?
Yeah, a lot.
Good. Anybody want to use Release Manager now?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
No, it's a great product. It's really, I've just been so impressed with it. It's fun. It's just amazing. Well, thanks very much for coming out in the snow and hearing me talk about Release Manager. I really appreciate it. I had a lot of fun.